William Herndon. He was the first, we thought at one time he was the first outsider to explore the entire length of the Amazon Valley, Amazon River. But there apparently was an English explorer who preceded him, I think, by 10 or 15 years. But he led the American expedition down. He was quite a hero, and he had written a book about it. He actually wrote it for the Congress because he did it for Congress. And he was keeping tabs on all of the vegetation along the way, and the depth of the water, and the elevations, and the crops that were grown, and the peoples and the customs in the area, and reported back to Congress because they wanted to know what was there. And he was such a beautiful writer, and what he wrote was so lyrical and imaginative. People couldn't believe some of the things that he actually viewed with his own eyes. And so this report got out, and it became a big bestseller internationally, and so he was quite well known.
Do you know the name of the book?
It was called Exploration of the Valley of the Amazon, 1853 to 1854. I think those dates are right. It was something like that. I actually, my publisher, after the book was published, my book, Ship of Gold, bought that for me. They actually found a copy of it, an old original copy that was submitted to Congress. It's a beautiful book with hand-drawn maps and illustrations that were all pencil, graphite. It's a beautiful piece, and his writing is beautiful. That he was, this is something I've always said that little boys, when a little boy is born, his first thought is, how am I going to react in the foxhole? And I think little boys grow up that way. It's what would I do? I've been watching this latest series, Pacific, and I watched Band of Brothers not too long ago. It's been out for a long time, but I just saw it fairly recently, and you wonder, my dad was in World War II, but you wonder how would you react in a situation like that? And this guy has 600 lives in his hands, and he knows because he can use all of his celestial navigation equipment. Even in this storm, he was able to figure out roughly that he was 200 miles offshore, and he's got all these lives in his hand, and he knows that he's going to die. He was a deeply religious man, and he knows he's going to die, but he's got all these other lives, and he's got to keep them buoyed as long as he can. And because he does that, and because all of these miners, and I realize that if we've got 30 women and 30 children on board, that means that out of the 500 passengers, not very many of them are husbands and fathers, at least with people on board. So these were miners who bailed. They started leaking during the hurricane. They probably would have been able to weather the hurricane, but they sprung a leak. And as water was coming into the hold, they just formed bucket brigades, and they bailed for 30 hours. Now, standing in line...
what do you mean by they bailed for 30 hours? What does that mean?
They bailed water out of the hold, down where the coal was stored and the engines had gone out because the water had leaked in and put them out.
Got it.
But they just had buckets, tubs, pitchers from the rooms up above, the berths. They were getting the water out, and they had about 4 gangways, and they would just pass them up the stairs and dump it overboard. And these, the buckets were, they probably weighed 15, 20 pounds, and they're passing these from one hand to the next guy.
What an exhausting process.
Well, for 30 hours, and you have to realize they were all sick. They were all seasick. And they hadn't slept in 2 nights, literally had not had a wink of sleep. They had had nothing to eat for 2 days because nobody could eat. And then for that effort, and they were saving the women and children. They didn't have any loved ones, if you will, on board. So they were just doing the right thing. It is, it's honestly one of America's finest hours.
How did you get involved in the story? What brought you into the story, doing the research on it, and putting the book together?
Like so many things in life, Kim, I didn't mean to do it. It was kind of an accident. I had published 2 books, and I was looking for a topic for my 3rd book, and I wanted to... I'd read an article about Tom Wolfe, who was one of my heroes. If I could say one person was a huge influence on my writing career and style and an interest in writing, it would be Tom Wolfe. And this article, the interviewer asked him, where do you go looking for such great stories? And they were talking mainly about The Right Stuff, about the astronauts, the original astronauts going into space. And he said, I never look for a great story. He said, I look for an interesting topic. And in researching that topic, I discover a great story. And he said that his research for The Right Stuff started out as an interest in rockets and Wernher von Braun and the Germans who came over and how they developed rocketry here. But then as he got further into it, he realized that the real story was with the men who put their hides on top of those rockets and got blasted out into space for the first time. And that's how he wrote The Right Stuff. So I started thinking about what would make an interesting story. Something that I would enjoy working on, and also something that had some physical involvement in it, because as a storyteller, when you're writing nonfiction, you have to get your facts straight. All the stuff that's going on now about people making stuff up and it doesn't make any difference, and it was sort of like this, that doesn't fly. That is not nonfiction. That is fiction. But if you're going to write real narrative nonfiction, you got to do all the research. You got to find out what really did happen. You got to talk to the people who were there. You got to read all the accounts. You got to go there yourself, see what it was like, what it felt like, what it looked like, sounded like, and then you put all that together in a story form. But to drive a narrative, it really helps if you have some physical involvement in it. And I had gotten certified as a scuba diver, a long time earlier when I was in school in Florida. And at the time I started working on Ship of Gold, I was living in Idaho. There was not a lot of opportunity for scuba diving there, but I started thinking about scuba diving and what could I do with scuba diving for a story. And there were two obvious answers. One is treasure hunting, and the other is underwater archaeology. And I started looking into, at the time, this would have been in early '87, Mel Fisher had found the Atocha off Key West after something like 18 years of searching for it. And I thought, well, I'd be interested in doing a story about him, maybe, and there would be physical involvement in that, and that would be interesting, his 18-year search for the Atocha. And I read an article on him, and I called the author and talked to her and about the possibility of my doing a book on him, and she advised me not to do it because it was, she said that a lot of these kids are on drugs, and Mel's kind of a nice guy, but he'll tell you one thing one day and totally the opposite the next day, or it'll be worth twice as much a week later. And but she said there's another story that you might be interested in. And it's about this American ship that sank off the Carolina coast in 1857. And I remember thinking at the time that's not that interesting. That was not that sexy a story. Boy, was I wrong. But I was thinking in terms of the Spanish, Maine and the galleons and the jars of rubies and emeralds and religious reliquaries and things like that. So I started looking into this story, and I flew east to meet with the guy that she had interviewed, who said he was going to go out that summer on an expedition to find the Central American. I thought, well, that's close to scuba diving, to going out on this expedition, so I could see if I could get myself ensconced with this group. And he was a very nice man, but he just didn't have the wherewithal to go out. He didn't have the money. He really didn't. He knew a lot about how the ship sank, but he didn't know anything beyond that. But when I was talking to him one day, we were in this little waterside tavern in Charleston, and he said, I thought you might like to see this. And he reached into his wallet, and he pulled out this old yellowed piece of paper. Oh, that wasn't that old, really. It was just newspaper, and he unfolded it. And it was a recent article about a group that had filed an admiralty claim on a side-wheel steamer that sank off the Carolina coast in the mid-19th century. Well, anybody who knew the story of the Central America knew that had to be the Central America. And so I just got a name. I just saw a name there. One of the lawyers representing the group was named Bill Kelly. And I went back to my motel immediately, and I called Ohio